most part. Can you give me a status report? I guess that means we're stuck until batteries are charged. Well, on the bright side, it wouldn't be the first time. Any idea where we are? Well, there's only one thing left to do while we wait. This game's not going to review itself. What is there to say that hasn't already been said about this game? Everyone has already bashed it to hell and back. Hell, to many people, this is the game that almost killed Sonic. And yeah, it's fair to believe that this game is a mess. Now, let's get started with the story. And man, where do I begin? Seriously, I don't know. Much like the other games I've done for this marathon so far, multiple stories intertwine with one into a larger, overarching plot. But even then, I'm not 100% sure where to begin. Good idea. Let's start with Sonic. And I'm not kidding. Sonic, the main character and the one that the game is named after, is the character with the least amount of plot relevance in this game. Hell, his story starts with a realistic looking girl on a boat in some kind of festival. If you didn't know any better, you'd think this is a Final Fantasy game. That's not to say these cutscenes look particularly bad, it just doesn't look like a Sonic game. Anyway, this character is Princess Elise, and the festival is for the god of this kingdom? It's weird. As she lights a, frankly, nice looking flame decoration thing, the boat she is on is attacked by Eggman, who is also sporting a more realistic design. Now, people gave this design some crap during the time of release, but after seeing Jim Carrey's Eggman design, I feel this design is fine. Hell, like I said earlier, these cutscenes, at least the pre-rendered ones, look good. That being said, the in-game cutscenes don't. They look like, well, they look like the movie Food Fight, and you should never look like Food Fight. Elise herself is such a nothing character. Now, I know people joked about Sonic saving a princess in this game, but frankly, I don't think him saving a princess, or anyone in particular, is a problem. It's the way they handled it that is a problem. Pretty much every time she gets kidnapped in this story, the second Sonic turns his back, she gets kidnapped again. At least in a Mario game, when Bowser kidnaps Peach, she's only kidnapped once per game. Elise is kidnapped 5 times just in Sonic's story. All she does is just sit and clasp her hands together, and she's the ruler of this kingdom. And if this is what the ruler of a kingdom does, then I feel sorry for the people of Soliana. Hell, the guards don't do anything of use while their princess is missing. They just play guessing games with random people. I wonder if it's sort of like England, where the royal family doesn't really do much except for be a pretty public figure, where the real leader is the prime minister, I guess. Maybe it's something like that. Anyway, after Eggman kidnaps Discount Peach, she tosses Sonic one of the Chaos Emeralds. No idea how she got it or how long she would have had it, but Sonic grabs it and says he'll try and save her, only to end up waiting until the next day to do anything. At least when he did this in Sonic Adventure, it was believable to assume that Chaos was defeated. He doesn't even spend the night trying to get info on Eggman. He just waits to the next day. And the next morning, he meets up with Tails before running through a beach in hopes of catching up with Eggman. You know what would have helped with that? Chasing him the night prior. He doesn't even catch up with Eggman. He gets away and Sonic has to go through a different stage just to figure out where Eggman is hiding, which turns out to be a desert. Once failing to actually save the princess, Sonic ends up running around Soliana trying to get information just to figure out where Eggman can be, which, like I said, was in a desert. Once defeating one of Eggman's giant mechs, Sonic takes Elise back to the city while Tails distracts Eggy's bots. Unfortunately, once back in Soliana, Sonic gets attacked by Silver and Elise is almost immediately captured by Eggman. I'll talk about Silver more when I get to the other stories, but for now, he's just kind of here. It's not really explained. To be fair, Silver fights Sonic because he thinks Sonic is some sort of Iblis trigger or a weird villain, and as far as he knows, he did just kidnap the princess. We know he didn't, but Silver doesn't. I mean, it's not a great excuse, but it's there. After getting knocked around, Amy jumps in and stops Silver, giving Sonic enough time to get away from this crazy hedgehog. Eventually, Sonic meets up with Knuckles, who tells him that Eggman wants to meet him somewhere. Tails immediately knows it's a trap, but they all end up going anyway. Once there, Eggman forces them to give the Chaos Emerald that they have in return for the princess, only to use the emerald to send them through time. You would think that they would have figured this out beforehand, but... Anyway, something that I find interesting about this is the reason that Eggman is trying to get the Flames of Disaster is actually for this time machine, seeing as it's just a prototype. In fact, he doesn't even know where he sent Sonic, just that he sent him through time. If I had to guess, a full version of this time machine would allow him to travel to specific points in time. Just food for thought, especially as someone who has dealt with time travel in his time. That pun was not intended, and I am so very sorry. Anyway, the place where Sonic and his gang arrive is a far distant future. I think it's supposed to be 200 years, but I don't know if it was confirmed. Also, strangely enough, Shadow and Rouge are here, and they explain the situation to Sonic and his friends, saying that they were sent to a far post-apocalyptic future. Somehow they figure out that using Shadow's chaos control, they could travel back to their own time. I don't even fully know how that would work, but if I had to guess, it's because chaos control is sort of a way for the user to slow down time around them to make it look like they're moving faster, so two people using it at the same time can open a rift through time. Either way, we need to get 2 Chaos Emeralds to leave this post-apocalyptic hellscape, so Shadow goes to get one and Sonic gets the other. After fighting a weird demonic worm thing and leaving said hellscape, Tails, Sonic, and Knuckles all arrive back in Soliana about a week after Eggman sent them to the future. I guess time travel with the Chaos Emeralds isn't exact. Which would explain why Eggman sent them to a random place in time as opposed to a specific place. Unfortunately now, Sonic has to chase a moving train before it runs into different series of bombs because Elise is on the train and is being controlled by Eggman. I hate this stage because you have to race against the clock just to stop the train from hitting those bombs. And even if you get past that, you have to deal with one of the more annoying Mach speed sections in the game as Sonic runs after the train while dodging other trains. It's just not fun. After that annoying ass stage, Sonic runs off with Elise, only to be attacked by Silver again, causing her to be kidnapped by Eggman not 5 minutes after us rescuing her. At least Sonic immediately saves her again, but that just makes me wonder why Silver even attacked Sonic from a story standpoint. I get that he still doesn't trust Sonic, but even then, this scene does not need to exist. The only reason I can explain why it's here is to give an explanation as to why Sonic suddenly fights another Eggman boss, but even then, there are better ways to write a scene like this. Once finally back at the castle, Eggman threatens just to nuke the entire kingdom if Elise doesn't surrender to him. And because no one in this game really has two brain cells to rub together, she of course surrenders, which for some reason results in Tails going through Wave Ocean again to follow Eggman just to figure out where he's going. Why is it every time we've done this stage, we just end up back where we started? I swear, it's almost as if Sonic Team wanted to make a remake of the opening stage of Sonic Adventure, but forgot what actually made that stage enjoyable to people in the first place. And, of course, we still have to follow Eggman through a different stage anyway, so we successfully waste our time doing this stage. Tails could have easily just done this off screen. Once he catches up to Sonic and explains what happened, Sonic is required to do a series of trials before he is able to follow Eggman again, because the old castle that he has to run through is blocked. As annoying as these trials are, I can understand this from a world-building standpoint. I mean, it could be a common tourist attraction, and with someone like Eggman threatening to destroy the kingdom, I believe them wanting to make sure someone doesn't destroy the landmark. And they probably just don't fully trust Sonic, even though he did rescue Princess Elise like 7 times at this point. That doesn't stop these trials from pissing me off. One of the trials requires you to jump through multiple warp portals to find a gold ring. If you don't already know where to go or have a guide on you, you can end up spending longer here than you'd want, probably upwards to 20 minutes. It just pisses me off, but at least this one is tolerable. After that, you have to defeat every enemy in an area without any rings. If you get hit once, you'll have to redo the entire trial again, and if you die enough times to this trial, you'll have to do the first one over again. It's such a pain in the ass that it really makes me wonder why this is a required mission. After that, you have a laughable trial of love, which just requires you to choose your favorite Sonic ship. At least this is easy, as you can't really lose it. You just choose whether you like Elise more or Amy more, with me going with the obvious choice. Once we finally get to the next stage, Sonic gets ambushed by Eggman's robots before being saved by Silver. I guess when Shadow spoke to him, he must have knocked some sense into him. Which is good, because now he's on our side. And, luckily, we even have him help us as we chase Eggman's ship through Kingdom Valley. Unfortunately, they aren't fast enough to catch up before Eggman's ship crashes, as Silver, Sonic, and... Oh, hey Blaze, I almost forgot you were in this game. Anyway, they watch as the ship goes down. Something went wrong, somehow, to cause the ship to crash, with Sonic and Silver deciding that they might be able to use the chaos-controlled time travel trick again to save them. But instead of Silver following Sonic to make sure he doesn't fuck up, he goes back to his future. No one in this game has 2 brain cells to rub together, and it bothers me. Silver wants to make sure his future is a better place, so you would think he would follow Sonic to make sure that would happen. As for Sonic, if he can use the ability to time travel at will, then why not use it earlier? Even if it's not exact, it would still be useful. Hell, you could use it to wait for Eggman and ambush him. I mean, what, you'd be off by a few seconds? That's nothing. Let's just get this story over with. After traveling back in time and chasing Eggman through his secret base here, we finally confront him before his ship is supposed to crash, and we save Elise, thus ending Sonic's story in this mess. Before I move on to the other stories, I do want to talk about Sonic's playstyle here, just real quick. For starters, I have to give the game some credit. Instead of Sonic Heroes or Shadows' clunky gameplay style, which I didn't hate, but it could have been better, this game returns to Sonic Adventure style, even going back as to bring hub worlds that were in Sonic Adventure 1. Unfortunately, they're a pain. It's extremely easy to get lost just trying to find a stage or one of the side missions. Hell, I think I got circled around 5 times just doing the one side mission that requires you to find 5 random kids in Soliana. That's not even beginning to mention the abysmal loading screens. If you want to see the worst this game has to offer, try Aristo's challenge. Several loading screens for a single mission. And on top of that, every time he talks, you have to load the area again. Even though this mission can take less than a minute, you're spending maybe upwards to 5 waiting for the loading screens to finish. This mission alone will make anybody loathe doing any of the side missions, despite the fact that they are necessary to get upgrades in this game. On top of that, you have to deal with the game's overly clunky controls. As you're moving Sonic, every time you tilt the analog stick, Sonic makes a 90-degree turn in any direction you move him in, and that can lead you to falling into bottomless pits or off a cliff when you never intended that. It's hard to be precise. You would think Sonic Team would have blueprints on how to make a good 3D platformer because they did Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. And yeah, the SA1 and 2 remakes on GameCube weren't perfect, but even those were still enjoyable. But here, it's like they took everything that was good about those games and somehow forgot about them. To be fair, this game was rushed, and I mean rushed to hell and back. They were forced to release this for the 15th anniversary of Sonic with absolutely no exceptions. The only ones that they technically had was the PC version, which, yes, was intended to come out, got cancelled, and the Wii version ended up becoming Sonic and the Secret Rings. Even if they only focused on just one gameplay style, that's still not enough time to polish this game. I mean, worst comes to worst, if they didn't have to worry about Shadow or Silver's gameplay styles and just focused on Sonic, it could have turned out like, say, Sonic Frontiers did when that launched. Yeah, it was kind of buggy and had a lot of different problems, but for a lot of people, myself included, Sonic Frontiers is one of their favorite Sonic games. Honestly, the whole development just kind of saddens me. I guess I can talk about the development of this game later. The quicker we get out of here, the better. Pixel, can you activate the autopilot? I'm gonna try and get back to the review. Don't tell me the autopilot was knocked out. What happened to my recording monitor? That's crazy. The only thing that can interfere with the ship would be something that can alter fixed points in time. Fine. You mind if I borrow your monitor? Alright, in that case, let's get back to the review. Well, we looked at Sonic's story, so let's look at Edgy the Hedgies. Shadow's story begins with him on a special mission from the President to save a gun agent. You would think he would think twice about working with Gunn or the President, but I guess this must be community service for what he did in the last game. The more interesting thing is the agent he has to rescue is Rouge, who had snuck into Eggman's base to steal the Scepter of Darkness. No idea why Gunn wants it, but we have to help Rouge escape anyway. Oh, and on the way, we fight Eggman's giant guard dog that was in Sonic's playthrough. Didn't know where else to put it, just thought I'd mention. With that taken care of, we teleport out of Eggman's base and to Soliana. Rouge tries to tell Shadow why she was sent to get the scepter, which, funnily enough, a gun agent refers to as the Book of Darkness, which is probably a holdover from an earlier draft of the story, or something. Shadow, of course, doesn't care about the scepter and just wants to get the job done. Rouge asks Shadow to take her to a rendezvous point, which happens to be in Soliana's old castle. Shadow begrudgingly takes her there after dealing with annoying vehicle sections. Just to bring this up, Shadow plays almost exactly like Sonic. However, he's not as fast as Sonic, with his gameplay being more focused on combat as opposed to just speed sections trying to get through a stage. He is also required to use vehicles that are just clunky. The controls are already stiff enough, but the vehicles are somehow slippery. It just doesn't seem to add up. Hell, if the vehicles weren't necessary when they were there, it wouldn't be as much of a problem, but the first stage requires you to use one of these vehicles just to destroy spotlights because Shadow's own abilities can't take them down on its own. Immediately afterwards, in Shadow's second stage, you are required to use a hovercraft to go across the water. This hovercraft can immediately kill you just trying to get into the water, because the game just suddenly wants the hovercraft to crash if you nosedive into the water, as opposed to just taking a bit of health from the vehicle. On top of that, if you don't already know about the obstacles, you'll die multiple times just trying to get to the next checkpoint. These are the first two stages in Shadow's story, and for the game to require this level of accuracy, especially when the game doesn't grant that accuracy with these vehicles, is too much to ask. These games are targeted towards a 7 to 13-year-old audience, and this is too difficult for that audience. Anyway, getting back to the story, once at this rendezvous point, Rouge and Shadow are immediately ambushed by Eggman's forces as he tries to get the scepter back, which results in it being shattered when Eggman attacks a fleeing Rouge. Once the scepter breaks, Eggman retreats, frightened, as a pillar of darkness shoots from where the scepter broke. Once the pillar wipes out Eggman's bots, it takes Shadow's shadow and transforms into a form similar to his. This is Mephiles the Dark, and he seems to know Shadow personally. As thanks for freeing him, Mephiles sends Shadow and Rouge to the future, which at least explains why they are suddenly there in Sonic's story. In fact, we almost immediately meet with Sonic and the gang and explain the situation before going to find the Chaos Emeralds. Luckily, I already explained this bit in Sonic's story, so I don't have to go over it again, but whereas Sonic and his group do go to the past, the only one in Shadow's group that happens to return is Rouge. Shadow, seeing Mephiles and a random flame, gives chase just as the time rift closes. Rouge, realizing Shadow is still in the future, decides to find Gamma, who they did see in that future earlier. Knowing that he survives that long, she gives him the task of helping Shadow in the future and gives him the Chaos Emerald that she brought back with her. Meanwhile, back in the future, Shadow confronts Mephiles to fight him. Mephiles, during this time, tries to get Shadow to join him by explaining that humans ended up imprisoning him after considering him a threat. Which does make a bit of sense. That's kind of what happened in Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow, of course, doesn't go with Mephiles because he dealt with this shit in his own game. Before Mephiles can get to Shadow, Gamma shows up to give Shadow support, before Mephiles escapes through another time rift with Shadow and Gamma close behind. However, despite taking the exact same time rift, Shadow and Gamma end up back in Soliana's town with Mephiles nowhere in sight. This is just something that bothers me about the story of this game. That's not to say the story is good by any means, but the time travel doesn't make sense. Time travel already is a chaotic plot point, and I know that from experience as a writer. The problem I have is the game doesn't explain or really set any rules for how this time travel works. The characters are able to use rifts in time to travel, but the problem I have is they are almost completely random in how they work depending on what the writer of the story wants them to do. One character can use them and it would send them to a random place, which would be fine, but then we see Shadow able to go to very specific points in time. You can't have both forms. If you have time travel that contradicts itself, then all you're doing is confusing the audience, especially when time travel itself already convolutes the story enough. It also doesn't help when you have situations like this, where one character can use a rift that another character had, only for both characters to end up in completely separate places. We'll see this again in Silver's story, where Sonic is able to go to the past using a rift, whereas Silver goes to the future. Why does that happen? Shouldn't they both go to the same point in time? Let's just get back to the story. Once back in the present, Shadow catches up with Rouge, who tells him that Eggman's robots are trying to find him, which she concludes is really Eggman's trying to find Mephiles, which makes a bit of sense seeing as they both look alike now. This causes Shadow to follow Eggman through the radical train stage that gave me shit in Sonic's playthrough. The difference here is Shadow has to destroy the train instead of saving it. It would be funny if this was the same train, I guess. After catching up with Eggman's train, Shadow tries to get information out of Eggman, with the Doctor really only revealing that Mephiles is connected to the Solaris project that happened 10 years ago. The only way Eggman is willing to give more information is if Shadow captures Mephiles again and brings him to him. Seeing as he doesn't really have any other leads, he heads out to capture Mephiles, only to run into Sonic, who's being attacked by Silver again. Stepping between the two, he fights Silver, which at least leads to probably the best part of this entire game.
Chaos Control!
Never gets old. Silver, probably after being treated like a joke in his debut game, tries to use Chaos Control against Shadow, only for the two of them to accidentally open another time rift. Shadow explains to Silver that Mephiles is the real villain and can show proof as long as Silver follows him to the past, which he does, leading the two to end up in a Soliana lab where the king is experimenting on their god. There's only one of 5 ways this will end, and none of them are good. Yeah, that's not gonna help. And sure enough, immediately the lab blows up, with the scientists accidentally creating both Mephiles and Iblis. That at least tells Silver who the real bad guy is, with the two getting away. Silver ends up going after Iblis, and Shadow goes after Mephiles. And after running through these labs, we are able to catch up with him. Shadow quickly imprisons him in the Scepter of Darkness, which explains why Mephiles knew Shadow in the present. Now, it is a bit confusing, but I'll try and explain it the best I can. This is an example of a bootstrap paradox, which is fairly common in time travel stories. Essentially, Shadow was always supposed to seal Mephiles in the past because Mephiles says he does. Another great example of this is in Ocarina of Time. In that game, Link learns the Song of Storms from an annoyed musician who says a kid played the song and forced the windmill to spin rapidly. Of course, when Link learns this song, he then goes back in time and is revealed to be the kid who first played the song in the first place. Anyway, with Mephiles and Iblis now sealed, Silver and Shadow return to the present, where Shadow, now with the knowledge of how to seal Mephiles again, goes to find him in the desert. After a quick boss fight, Shadow attempts to seal Mephiles only for him to criticize him for trying the same trick twice. Ironically, he does this after trying to get Shadow to join him again. You would think he would see the irony in this, but no one in this game has two brain cells to rub together, as I mentioned. Shadow then proceeds to remove the inhibitor rings he has on his wrist, something hilariously enough that they took from Sonic X, and continues to fight Mephiles. Unfortunately, we don't see this fight, as this is where Shadow's stories end. I also skipped past this, but before the final boss with Mephiles, there is a stage where you get to play as Gamma as he tries to hunt down Mephiles. And it's fine. I mean, you can easily cheese the stage because there's no meter for Gamma's flight, and if you just keep hitting the jump or hover button, he could hover indefinitely. At least here we learn that Gamma is supposed to be the one that seals Shadow away in the future, which means at some point he had to betray his friend. And it would be a more interesting plot point if this story actually meant anything to, well, anyone. Now, something I brought up with Sonic's story is the development of this game was chaotic. I don't want to go into too much detail. You can find different videos that actually talk about the full development. But for now, I will say this. The game was shown in 2005, a year before it would have come out, but during its development, Yuji Naka left Sega to start his own company, which left the project a bit hectic, seeing as he was the main lead and now they had to shift focus. I would call him an asshole again for this situation, which granted, it was a dick move, but at the same time, I'm kinda with him. If I've seen a lot of these projects go up in smoke, I'd want to get out as fast as I can. Unfortunately, they had to get this game out by Christmas of 2006, so they didn't have time to make the game they wanted to make. Allegedly, the version we got wasn't even a finished version and was a prototype that was sent out instead of what was intended. I don't know if I believe that, but it is a story that I've seen go around a couple times. And honestly, it actually makes sense considering how much of a broken mess this game is. That's not to say the game couldn't have shipped in a poor state, but it would have at least been a little more polished. One of the other theories I've seen go around with this game is that at one point it was meant to be a series reboot for Sonic, but I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. Every part of this story acts as a continuation from previous games, even if they don't immediately address something. Personally, I feel that if this was supposed to be a true reboot, like people say, then why do the characters act as though they've known each other for years? That's not to say you couldn't do a reboot and have them do that, but the fact that they actually seem to have some sort of history, as if this is a continuation and not a these characters have never existed before, it just doesn't add up. Hell, Rouge is working for Gun, and Shadow very clearly feels like a version that went through the same shit he went through in his own solo game. It just doesn't add up. I don't get why people keep calling this a reboot when Nothing in this game feels like it's meant to be a reboot of any past game. Just like how the time anomalies that have affected our ship so far don't add up. Well, it's almost as if the anomalies don't want us to review this game. But other than a diehard fan, I don't know what would want to do that. Unless... Pixel, brace yourself. I know what's causing the anomalies, and we're gonna get hit by a pretty big one. Fifth Phantom Saga is an interesting game. It was being developed as an exclusive launch title for the PlayStation 3, and was even being made by Sonic Team. The game had you control a phantom similar to a Stan from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with psychokinesis abilities. This gives you the ability to move blocks and interact with the environment in interesting ways. Unfortunately, the game was cancelled. The trailers weren't really looked at with much positive light, and if I had to guess, this had something to do with the game being cancelled, along with the fact that Yuji Naka was leaving Sega during its development. He was working on the game, and from what I could find about it, it seems like he was one of the main guys in charge. So him leaving definitely put a dent in that game releasing. Honestly, from looking at the trailers and gameplay that we have, the game looks interesting. But again, it never came out. I don't even know if the game was fully playable outside of a tech demo. Now, why am I talking about this game if it never came out? Well... It's because the psychokinesis abilities were reused for Silver the Hedgehog. Oh, and don't worry about me. I may be stuck in a timeless void, but it's not the first time I've dealt with stuff like this. Plus, Sonic's friends are busy collecting the Chaos Emeralds, so I'm kinda stuck until they do that. Unfortunately, Pixel isn't here to keep me company because he was stuck in my ship. Luckily, Tails let me use one of his monitors. I think it's the Miles Electric, so I'm just going to continue where I left off in the story. Somewhere in a distant, post-apocalyptic future, a white-furred hedgehog flies around, wondering how the world could be brought to such chaos. This is Silver, and he has been in constant battle with Iblis, a fire demon that seemingly controls this dystopian future. Blaze, from Sonic Rush, who is somehow alive in this future, tells him that Iblis has returned, and they both go to fight him. So, Blaze in this game comes from the future. The problem with that is Sonic Rush says she's a princess from another dimension, and both games came out fairly close to each other. In fact, it's safe to assume they were both developed around the same time. The problem is when these games are supposed to be in the same continuity and end up contradicting themselves. Funnily enough, Rush is supposed to take place before this game, but Sonic doesn't recognize her, nor does Blaze really recognize him. Iizuka stated it's because everyone had amnesia in 06, and frankly, it would explain everyone acting like idiots. And despite me being confused when people act like this game is a reboot, this is one of the few times where it kinda makes sense. Anyway, with this first stage, let's quickly talk about Silver's gameplay. And man, is it disappointing. Firstly, Silver moves very slowly. One of the few ways he actually moves fast is using his psychokinesis, but his meter drains just as fast. The best option in most cases is to actually repeatedly press the button to flutter, so to speak, to platforms. He is able to gain upgrades, but they don't really do much. As for his main gameplay style, the psychokinesis, I honestly enjoy it. It's not great, but if you know what you're doing, you can easily toss items at enemies, and even upgrade this to stun and grab enemies themselves. It makes me wonder if the fifth Phantom Saga would have been any good if the game actually came out. Now, I haven't talked about the amigos, as the game puts it, but these are the side characters that you play as in each character's story. For Sonic's story, you get Tails and Knuckles. For Shadow, you have Rouge and Omega, and yes, I do realize I called him Gamma during Shadow's section. I got a little confused. As for Silver, we have Blaze, and later we get Amy. Blaze is probably one of the better amigos, because she just plays like Sonic. The only difference is she has a double jump, and her version of a homing attack is more of a pounce jump, which works with her being a cat, though it did take me some time getting used to. Amy, on the other hand, feels like she was nerfed from her gameplay in Sonic Adventure. She's almost as slow as Silver, and her only attack is her hammer, which requires you to be completely still to use it. In the meantime, you can easily get hit while you try and attack an enemy. She also has a double jump that just sucks, as well as an invisibility move that I never used. It's a bit more upsetting because if I remember correctly, Amy wouldn't be playable in a mainline game again until Frontiers, and even that wasn't in the base game. It was an update that was added a year after the release. And no, I'm not counting adding her to the past games as a bonus. If she wasn't there in the original, she doesn't really count as a new game. Now, getting back to the story, after fighting Iblis, Silver wonders if there's a way to rid themselves completely of the monster. Enter Mephiles the Dark. He tells Silver and Blaze that if they wanted to stop Iblis, they would have to go back in time and stop the person responsible. He tells Silver that this Iblis trigger is Sonic, and he does this by showing Sonic overlaid with flames on a black background. An effect you can easily recreate in most video editors. In fact, there we go. I guess Silver doesn't know what video editing is. And of course, because this lovability is so gullible, he decides to go with the guy who is named after the devil. To be fair, I'm pretty sure he doesn't get the reference, and honestly, I didn't get it for the longest time, so I kinda understand. Plus, it's not like Blaze is really gonna do anything in this game. At least Elise had an excuse, seeing as she gets kidnapped for 90% of it, but Blaze might as well just find a shady place to fall asleep in like a real cat, which is a shame because she's one of the more enjoyable characters to play as. Mephiles takes Silver and Blaze back to the past, which would be the present for the rest of the characters, with Silver arriving in the Soliana Forest. Seeing as Blaze is nowhere to be seen and this guy is a hopeless idiot, Silver decides to head into the city to find out clues about where the blue hedgehog that Mephiles told him about would be. This leads him to watch Sonic save Elise from the attack at the beginning of the game. But before he can go and attack Sonic, Amy randomly appears and jumps on him, believing he is Sonic. This girl should probably get her eyes checked because this isn't the first time that she's done it, and it sure as hell will not be the last. As a way to make it up to him, she says she'll help him find the person he's looking for, completely oblivious to the fact that it's Sonic. The next morning, they end up wandering through the desert as Amy believes Sonic is here. To be fair, he's probably busy at this moment dealing with Eggman's robot guard dog now, but this leads us to probably the most infamous stage in this game, Silver's Dusty Desert. Chances are that if you know this game, you know of this stage in particular, and more importantly, of the billiards puzzle. You're required to get these balls into holes, and while the first puzzle isn't too challenging, the bigger one is. Do you see the number on the ball? That is for how many times you can use Silver's psychokinesis before the ball explodes. There is no other way to move the ball. You may think that can't be too bad, just make sure you get past the hallway before it reaches 0. Well, that would be one thing if it weren't for the fact that, for some reason, these balls also have a timer. A timer that is also the number located on the ball. So you are required to get this ball into a specific hole at the end of this pathway as fast as you can, while also making sure you don't hit it too many times. What I've seen people do just to get past this section is grab a box at the end of this pathway and clip through the door to get past. And frankly, that's what I did too. I mean, if the game wants to cheat, then I'm going to cheat right back. With that stage done, Silver and Amy return to Soliana's town square, where Silver sees Sonic and immediately attacks him, which leads Elise to get captured by Eggman. Before Silver can finish off Sonic, Amy steps in and stops him. She quickly chastises him for wanting to kill Sonic before leaving, with Silver not being able to explain himself. Silver wanders off, debating whether or not to kill one person to save the future, with Blaze reminding him that the entire reason they came here was to kill Sonic, contributing almost nothing to this plot outside of basically just being there. They decide to head to Eggman's base, as that's where Sonic was heading, in an effort to learn more about the situation. Once there, they find that they are too late to catch up with Sonic, as the base seems mostly empty outside of a few Eggman's robots. However, before they can leave, they are attacked by the Egg Genesis boss, which, once defeated, for some reason had a Chaos Emerald inside. Considering Eggman's plan requires these things, you would think he would keep an eye on them, as opposed to leaving them in one of his robots for anyone to steal. Silver and Blaze end up running into Mephiles again and ask him if he's so sure about Sonic being the Iblis trigger, with Mephiles more or less attacking Silver for questioning him in the first place and reminding him that if he doesn't kill Sonic, then the future that he lives in will continue to be shit. Honestly, if this is someone's reaction to questioning their motives, I'm pretty sure I would immediately leave and not trust that person. But Silver continues to follow Mephiles and heads to Radical Train. Blaze, of course, continuing to contribute nothing to this plot. After heading over to the train station, Silver runs into Sonic again and proceeds to attack him before Shadow shows up to knock some sense into the naive hedgehog. This leads into the section where Shadow takes Silver to the past, and luckily I already went over most of this, but here we watch as Silver try to trap Iblis, only for the King of Soliana to use the Chaos Emerald to seal the flame demon inside Princess Elise. Father of the Year, ladies and gentlemen. With the King's dying breath, he tells Elise that if she were to ever cry, she would release Iblis and bring chaos to the world. Maybe not the best idea to seal a demon inside of your, 7-year-old daughter? This plot point clearly reeks of a first draft problem. I know the game had a troubled development, but the bit that shows that the most is the story. On the off chance the gameplay could be polished up before release, we would have still be dealing with the incoherent plot. I had someone comment on my video for Shadow Story and brought up the fact that it is kind of a miracle the game even came out at all, considering some of the other companies that died during this time in the industry. I even mentioned in Shadow Story that there's a point where a gun agent refers to the Scepter of Darkness as the Book of Darkness, You would think they would redo that line, but it was kept in for some reason. Hell, there are other inconsistencies in the game, like the fact that Blaze and Sonic should know each other, and yet they act as though they've never met. However, Blaze does seem to remember Sonic, albeit faintly. So maybe there was originally supposed to be a point where she remembers working with Sonic to help get her Dimensions version of the Chaos Emeralds back. Shadow is even working for Gun under the President's order. Considering the shit he went through, you would think a character like Shadow wouldn't ever want to work for them, but here, he's acting as though the events of his solo game never happened. And, to be fair, I would want that game behind me, but the events did still happen. It's terribly incoherent, inconsistent, and needed another draft. Oh, right, I almost forgot. The thing that was causing all the anomalies. Well, with the game itself being this broken, it somewhat poetically caused rifts in time. When I started reviewing it, it sort of acted as a weird summoning ritual that caused the game to send anomalies through time. Luckily, thanks to my training with gear, I know exactly how to deal with anomalies like this one. Just need to take out the anomaly at the source. Luckily, in this case, I know where the source is. In the meantime, the quicker I get done with this story, the better. So I guess I'll just walk and talk. Once the king seals Iblis in his daughter, Silver carries the surprisingly still unconscious princess outside where Shadow is waiting. Before they head back to the present, Shadow leaves the Scepter of Darkness with Elise before they open the Time Rift. Silver leaves the Chaos Emerald he has with her, which at least explains why she has it in the beginning of the game. You know, unless you see the scene from Shadow's perspective, where somehow Silver still has it as he enters the rift. Once in the present, Silver now knows that Mephiles lied to him and goes to help Sonic to save the princess, who of course was captured by Eggman off-screen. Catching up with Sonic in the Soliana forest, Silver tells him that he now trusts him and will help him rescue Elise. We know where this leads, so I don't really need to rehash that, but I'll say this. Before Sonic goes back to the past, he gives Silver the emerald he has and trusts that Silver will do the right thing. Silver, in the meantime, heads back to the future with Blaze. Once there, Silver knows how to seal Iblis away, and that leads him to fight him again. Once weakened, Silver attempts to seal Iblis into his own body, but he has no luck. Blaze then steps in and sacrifices herself to seal Iblis, meaning she actually does something in this mess of a plot. With that, Silver is unfortunately alone in this futuristic hellscape. At least, in one positive note, Iblis won't be bothering him. However, the problem here is that if the future is like this, then that would mean Sonic failed. That leads us to the final story of the game, which, much like the other games I've reviewed, it unlocks after completing everyone's stories. So, with Silver's story finally finished, we have access to it. This final story begins with Sonic and Elise walking through Soliana's forest area before being distracted by a bright light from one of the Chaos Emeralds. Before they can react, Mephiles appears and stabs Sonic from behind with a beam of energy that kills him. That's right, the character that the game is named after, the main fucking character, dies. Need I remind everyone that this was the game they released for the 15th anniversary. Anyway, this leads Elise to cry, releasing Iblis. With his plan succeeding, Mephiles summons the Chaos Emeralds, somehow, and combines with Iblis to become Solaris once more. And the first thing this god does is plunge the world into a timeless void. Somehow this doesn't affect the cast of the game, seeing as they are all perfectly fine in this void, except for the dead Sonic and Blaze, who just noped out of the game when she saw the opportunity. Which is fair, I'd want to get out of here as quickly as possible myself. Everyone grieves over the dead hero before Elise is somehow able to sense Sonic's presence. He apparently isn't fully dead. I guess when Solaris accidentally brought the other characters here, he must have also brought Sonic's soul over. Don't ask me how that would work. This story is already way too damn convoluted for me to understand how most of the things in it just happen. Granted, this is the same series that will bring Sonic back from the dead with the power of friendship during the events of Frontiers. At this point, I've grown numb to a lot of the dumb things this series has. Silver thinks that if they are able to gather the Chaos Emeralds, then they might be able to use their power to bring Sonic back, so everyone runs through the different areas to regain them. And frankly, this is probably my favorite stage in the game. Yeah, it's long, but we get to see as everyone we have access to go through stages that we didn't get to see them in. Plus, these are only small sections of the larger levels. Strangely enough, this concept was reused for the Team Attack Amigo DLC that was released for this game. And yes, this game had DLC made for it. Unfortunately, said DLC didn't really come to the PlayStation 3 in America. While yes, the PlayStation 3 version had the super hard mode in America, as far as I know, we didn't get Team Attack Amigo or the boss rushes. That being said, all DLC is available on the Xbox 360 if you really want to play this game and all of its DLC. And, to be fair, this DLC came out in Europe and Asian countries. I didn't know that until doing research on the DLC for this video. Luckily, I was able to get it and play it, but you're not missing much. Anyway, I digress. After getting the emeralds, the gang regroups and uses them to revive Sonic in a scene that sent shockwaves through the fanbase and gaming media as a whole. I'm not going to say much about this because, frankly, like I mentioned, I've grown numb to this franchise. Plus, ironically, I'll take this scene over anything Ken Penders did to the franchise. With the infamous kiss out of the way, Sonic is revived into a super form and shares the power with Shadow and Silver as they take on Solaris. And genuinely, I love this fight. I'm not even exaggerating or playing this up for a joke. I honestly really like it. The fight was genuinely fun for me, despite the shit I had to go through just to get here. Each hedgehog gets their time to shine, using their unique abilities. Shadow uses his Chaos Blast to fire at this god. Silver uses his Psychokinesis to grab any rubble that Solaris flings at them and fire it back. And Sonic, frankly, just does what he's been doing and rams into him. After destroying the armor Solaris has, they reach Phase 2 as an instrumental version of His World Plays, which is my favorite song in the entire game. It just feels like the perfect climatic end to a game that tried its best to be an epic Sonic game. Once weakening the god, it somehow sends Sonic and Elise back in time. At this point, Solaris was just a small flame, barely a flicker. Elise hesitates to blow out the flame as she knows it would mean the events of the game would not have happened and she would forget Sonic. And frankly, that's where I am. The only way out of this timeless void would be to destroy the game, but I just can't bring myself to do it. The game is a broken, buggy mess, a rushed game that almost single-handedly killed the franchise, and most importantly, one that left a stain on the franchise's reputation that even to this day has never been able to be removed. But even then, I can't hate it. Sure, it's not great, but what made this game what it is wasn't the game itself, it was the development issues. The game was plagued with problems from the start. The first time this game was shown off, it had promise, but that was quickly dashed with all the behind-the-scenes trouble. With Yuji Naka leaving Sega during the development, it left the game without someone to steer the ship. Shun Nakamura, who was the game's director, was left in charge, but he was in a tough state. Sega wanted the game out by Christmas of 2006 with absolutely no exceptions, quality be damned. Many features that were planned for this game had to be cut because they didn't have time to get them done before release. In the game's manual, it even lists features or abilities that just are not in the game. One of the biggest ones is a rainbow gem for Sonic. His upgrades mostly are these gems, but this one is inaccessible. It allegedly would have given Sonic the ability to go super outside of the final boss, but it wasn't finished. I don't feel frustrated at this game. Well, outside of the few levels where very clearly I do. I feel pity. But there's still something I can do. Sonic reassures Elise that it will be okay and to
Just smile.
giving her the courage to blow out the flame and wiping this game's events from history. With that, Soliana Festival from the beginning of the game starts again before Sonic speeds through. Elise feels the presence of Sonic as the blue blur passes by in the background, with her getting a strange sense of deja vu. The game ends with Sonic on a roof of one of the buildings in the distance and looking up at the moon. And despite everything, it's a hopeful ending. And that is Sonic 06. As for my thoughts, well, like I said, it's a mess. The characters are way too stiff. Everyone turns with 90-degree angles, and characters like Amy and Silver just aren't really fun to mess with, just with how slow they are. Sonic and Blaze are probably the most fun you'll get out of this game, but that's about it. Shadow, Tails, Knuckles, and Rouge are also annoying. Omega isn't too bad for me, but he just feels like Gamma from SA1. The story is a colossal incoherent mess. That being said, I honestly enjoyed this game. I don't know what it is about it, but ever since I learned of the reputation, I tried steering clear of it. But a couple years ago, I decided to get myself a PlayStation 3, and this was one of the first games I bought for it. I've played many bad games over the years, but this one sort of had a charm to it that I enjoyed. I am in no way saying this game is good, but maybe if Sega gave the devs time to finish it, who knows? It could be seen as one of the better Sonic games. Oh god, no. It's actually because wiping the game from existence would have caused a paradox that was larger than the anomalies the game was pulling out. I also don't like selling my games, so I cash in a couple favors from Gear to have any anomalies purged from it. That being said, if you guys want to experience Sonic 06, I recommend looking at the fan remake, Project 06. It's been worked on for a while, and while it's not finished at the time of this video, all three characters have all of their stages playable, plus it has full mod support. As of now, the boss fights, town trials, cutscenes, and the final story haven't been finished, but even in the state it is now, it's the best way to play Sonic 06. On top of that, the upcoming Sonic X Shadow Generations will be adding stages from 06 for Shadow's new campaign. One of the first ones that we've seen is Windy Valley. It may sound strange, but despite everything, I'm happy this game exists. Because if it weren't for this game, Sega wouldn't have gone back to try and redeem Sonic's image in the public eye. We have stuff like the Sonic movies, Sonic Mania, and Frontiers. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, and I hope at least Sega has tried to learn from this game and not rush the development of Sonic games, or put too many cooks in the kitchen. I'll cross those bridges when I get to them. Now, in the meantime, I'd like to get to something else. In fact, the game may not be as recent anymore, but I have an idea of what I'll do next, so I'll see you guys then.